If you were betting on the AI horse race back in, say, 2023 or 2024,
Oh, yeah.
the smart money, I mean, really, all the money was on Microsoft.
It felt completely inevitable, didn't it? Just like gravity.
Exactly. They had the infrastructure, they had the enterprise lock-in, and of course they had the golden ticket, that OpenAI partnership.
The narrative was basically set in stone. Microsoft moves, the world follows.
And it felt like Google was scrambling, Apple was late to the party, Microsoft was just the undisputed king of the hill.
Right.
But I've been digging into the source material for our deep dive today, and it's all centered on this new Wall Street Journal investigation by Sebastian Herrera, and that whole narrative of inevitability. It's looking a little shaky.
Shaky is a very polite way to put it. I think we're looking at a real pivot point.
The article's title is Microsoft's Pivotal AI Product is Running into Big Problems. And it's dated just yesterday, February 3rd, 2026.
So this is happening right now.
This is the current state of play. And what really strikes me is that we're not talking about some, experimental side project. We're talking about Copilot.
The thing that Satya Nadella has bet the entire farm on.
The entire farm. And that phrase, betting the farm, it implies risk.
Which is something you don't normally associate with Microsoft, right? They usually play that long game, embrace, extend.
To extinguish.
Exactly. But this report, it suggests they're in what I'd call a scramble and patch phase right now.
So that's our mission today. We need to unpack how a company with such a massive head start, and arguably the best software distribution channel in history, is suddenly finding itself, as the report said.
Playing catch up.
Playing catch up. We have to look at the mechanics of why the product is frustrating users and what the data says about the sudden rise of competitors that we all thought were left in the dust.
And I think we need to frame this correctly, too. This isn't just about, a buggy chatbot. This is about the fundamental promise of generative AI in the workplace. If Microsoft, with all its advantages, can't make this work for the enterprise, can anyone?
That is the big question. Okay, so let's start with the relationship that really kicked this all off, the OpenAI factor.
Right.
For the last few years, the story was simple. Microsoft provides the compute, the cache.
And OpenAI provides the magic models.
But the source material suggests this marriage is on the rocks. It says the partnership is diminishing.
Diminishing is a very, very diplomatic word for what sounds like a strategic decoupling.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about the implications. Microsoft built their entire initial surge on the back of GPT-4 on OpenAI's brand Halo. It was this perfect symbiotic relationship.
It was.
But now, here in 2026, the report indicates Microsoft is scrambling to build Copilot into a standalone alternative to ChatGPT.
Which, okay, that makes sense strategically. You never want to be totally dependent on a single vendor for your core product.
Of course not. But the execution seems to be the real issue. The article explicitly notes that this transition is, quote, tough going.
It's that classic problem of changing the engine while the plane is in flight.
Exactly. They're trying to wean themselves off OpenAI and establish Copilot as its own thing. But when you take away that powered by OpenAI shield,
users start judging the product on its own merits.
And without that direct halo from OpenAI, all the little flaws in Microsoft's own integration are becoming, well, glaringly obvious.
And that, of course, leads us right to the competition. Because if Microsoft is stumbling, someone else is there to pick up the slack.
And the data in the journal article points to one name in particular.
Google's Gemini.
The comeback kid.
It really is. I mean, you remember the botched demos, the PR disaster.
It was rough.
And yet, the data that the journal reviewed shows that the percentage of users who favor Copilot over Gemini has actually decreased in recent months. That's a trend line you do not want to see if you're in Redmond.
And we have to talk about why that preference really matters. Because I know a lot of people might just say, who cares? Microsoft owns the corporate desktop. You use whatever your IT department gives you.
I was going to push on that, actually. Microsoft 365 is basically a monopoly in most offices. So does user preference even matter? If I prefer Gemini, but my boss is paying for Copilot, I'm using Copilot. End of story, right?
In theory, yes. But in practice, what we're seeing is shadow IT all over again.
Like when people started bringing their own iPhones to work because the company BlackBerry was awful.
It's the exact same dynamic, just with AI. If Copilot is full of friction and Gemini is smooth, employees are just. They're opening a new browser tab and pasting their work into Google.
So the preference metric is actually a leading indicator of utility.
It is. If people prefer the competitor, believe me, they will find a way to use it.
And that is a very dangerous spot for Microsoft to be in. They're relying on inertia, but their users are actively seeking out alternatives.
Which leads to the big question, why?
Let's get into the why. Why are people switching? The article cites current and former employees, and they outline some pretty deep structural issues. The first one is interoperability.
The holy grail of all enterprise software.
Right, and usually when we hear that word interoperability, we're thinking, can I open the file? But in the age of LLMs, it's so much more complex.
We really have to understand what it means in an AI context. It's not just about, importing a CSV into Excel anymore.
Yeah.
It's about semantic understanding across completely different data silos. You're asking an AI to look at an email in Outlook, understand the context of a meeting from your calendar, pull financial data from an Excel sheet.
And then draft a proposal in Word.
That's the dream workflow.
It is. Copilot, look at my last 3 emails in the Q3 spreadsheet and just write me a summary.
Exactly. But the engineering reality of making that happen is an absolute nightmare. You're dealing with different data structures, different context windows, legacy code bases that are, in some cases, 30 years old.
And the employees cited in the article basically admit this is where it all falls apart.
Yes. The AI struggles to maintain context or accuracy as it tries to move between these different apps.
So a user tries it once, they ask it to synthesize data, and it either hallucinates an answer or just gives a generic, sorry, I can't do that.
Or worse, it does the job, but it does it badly. It loses all the formatting, or it completely misinterprets a cell in Excel because the table wasn't set up like a perfect little database.
And once that happens, once that trust is broken on a complex task,
the user stops trusting it for even the simple tasks.
that's the trust thermocline. You cross it and you don't go back.
Precisely. And this is where that huge Microsoft advantage actually becomes a disadvantage. A startup, or even Google to some extent, they can build fresh containers for data. Microsoft is trying to retrofit this probabilistic AI model onto a deterministic suite of tools that was never, ever designed for this kind of fluidity.
So the very ecosystem that was supposed to be their strength is actually a trap?
It's proving to be the hardest engineering challenge they've faced. And that technical failure bleeds directly into the second major issue that the employees cited, branding.
This one I found really fascinating. Confusing brand positioning.
Yeah.
Now, on the surface, that just sounds like a marketing problem. Like, oh, we need a better logo.
Right, but the source implies it's much deeper than that. It's about product identity.
It's the Swiss Army knife problem.
It is. Microsoft has just slapped the Copilot label on absolutely everything. There's Copilot for GitHub, Copilot for security, Copilot for M365, Copilot Pro for consumers.
It's like back in 2015 when they put the word smart in front of every single device.
It's exactly like that. And the employees themselves are saying this is confusing the users. If I'm a user, I don't know what Copilot is for. Is it a search engine? Is it a creative writing tool, a coding assistant, an analysis bot?
And because it's trying to be all of those things at once, it sets this expectation that it's an expert in all of them.
Which, of course, it isn't. And that lack of clarity creates friction. If I don't know specifically what this tool is good at, I'm not going to build a habit around it.
Compare that to something like, say, Midjourney.
Perfect example. You know exactly what that is. It makes images. You go there, you make an image, you leave. Copilot is just this nebulous helper that pops up everywhere but often fails to deliver specific value in the moment.
It reminds me of the old Clippy days. Looks like you're trying to write a letter.
Yes, the intent is helpful, but if the execution is vague or intrusive, it just becomes an annoyance.
And that annoyance is actually quantifiable. The article drops a statistic about the enterprise suite that, honestly, it's just shocking.
The adoption rate.
The adoption rate.
Yeah. We talked about Microsoft having this massive captive audience. I mean, almost every major corporation on the planet runs on Microsoft 365. That's hundreds of millions of seats.
Hundreds of millions. And yet, the report states that only a small proportion of these subscribers are actually using Copilot.
That has to be terrifying for the leadership team.
It has to be. You have the software installed, it's literally on the ribbon at the top of the screen, and people are actively ignoring it.
It is the textbook definition of shelfware. Software that just sits on the shelf, or in this case, on the toolbar gathering digital dust.
But why? Is it just the glitches we talked about, or is there a pricing element here? Copilot isn't cheap for enterprise, right?
Cost is definitely a factor. It's a significant add-on per user. But I think it goes right back to that interoperability issue. CIOs and IT directors, they aren't stupid. They run pilots.
Okay.
So if they deployed 50 licenses to their finance team, and that finance team comes back and says, hey, the thing hallucinates numbers when I try to pull from Excel, The CIO is not going to approve the budget for the other 5,000 employees.
So the sales team can sell the grand vision to the CEO, but the product itself fails the stress test with the actual workers on the ground.
Exactly. And this is where that enterprise gap just gets wider and wider. Meanwhile, individual employees are finding Gemini or other tools are great for specific one-off tasks, summarize this PDF, draft this email, and they're just bypassing the corporate tool altogether.
Which brings us to the leadership context. The article features that image of Satya Nadella holding up the Copilot logo. I mean, he has really put his personal brand on the line for this.
He absolutely has. And you have to remember, Nadella is the guy who turned Microsoft around by focusing on the cloud, on Azure. He knows how to pivot a giant ship.
For sure.
But this is different. Cloud infrastructure is back-end. You sell it to engineers and CTOs. Copilot is front-end. You have to sell it to users. You have to win the battle for their attention every single day.
That's a great distinction. Microsoft hasn't had to win a consumer-style love battle in a very long time. They usually just win by default.
And you can't default your way to AI dominance if the product isn't, magical. The bar is just so much higher now. If the AI is mediocre, it's not just a bad tool, it's a liability.
Now, despite all this gloom and doom in the product report, the source notes that Microsoft's stock, MSFT, was actually up a little bit. The market doesn't seem to care yet.
The market is a lagging indicator here. Or maybe more accurately, the market is betting on the infrastructure.
On Azure.
On Azure. Microsoft still sells all the shovels for the AI gold rush. Even if Copilot itself fails, other companies are renting Microsoft's servers to run their AI, so the financial floor is very high.
They can win even if they lose.
Financially, maybe, for a while. But strategically, absolutely not. If Copilot fails to become the main interface layer for work, if that layer goes to Google or OpenAI or some new startup, Microsoft gets relegated to being a utility company.
Just the plumbing.
A very profitable utility, sure, but they lose control over the user experience, and that is what they are terrified of. They are fighting to remain the interface, not just the infrastructure.
So let's circle back to the employee perspective for a second. The article mentions frustration among the people actually building these tools. That feels rare for Microsoft.
It is. It signals a real disconnect between the mandate from leadership and the reality on the ground. Leadership is saying AI in everything by Q3.
Right.
And the engineers are saying, hang on, the models aren't ready to handle this kind of complex cross-app context. When you have that friction, you get product launches that feel half-baked.
It feels a little bit like the Windows Vista era all over again.
That's a fair comparison. Marketing promises the moon, and engineering is struggling to get the rocket off the launch pad. But the speed of the market is so different now.
How so?
In the Vista days, users had nowhere else to go. Mac was niche, Linux was for geeks. Now, if Copilot annoys me, I can switch to Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT in literally 2 seconds. The switching cost for the individual user has dropped to zero.
That is a profound shift. The moat that Microsoft always relied on. The difficulty of switching your software is basically gone because the interface is just natural language.
Right. I don't need to learn a new menu system. I just type my request into a different box.
Okay, so if we synthesize all of this, Microsoft starts with a huge lead. They bet the farm on OpenAI. That partnership gets complicated. They try to build their own integrated Copilot ecosystem.
But the tech, specifically the ability for all those apps to talk to each other, it isn't quite there yet.
And users get confused by the branding. And now, the default option is losing ground to competitors who are just simpler, more focused.
I think simpler and more focused on being a tool rather than trying to be an entire ecosystem. Google's approach with Gemini has been much more iterative. They've had their stumbles, for sure, but they're integrating it into Workspace more cautiously. Microsoft, it seems, tried to boil the ocean.
And kind of burn the user's hand in the process.
A little bit, yeah. And look, we shouldn't count Microsoft out. They have billions in cash, some of the smartest engineers in the world.
And they do listen to enterprise feedback. Eventually.
They do. They fixed Vista. They fixed the Xbox One launch. They are capable of a major course correction.
But the clock is ticking a lot faster this time.
Much, much faster. Every month that Copilot remains frustrating is another month where Gemini or ChatGPT becomes the new default habit for a user. And once those habits set in, they're incredibly hard to break.
It really challenges that whole idea that first mover advantage is the end-all be-all.
It might be a case of first mover disadvantage.
Explain that.
You educate the entire market on what the technology should do, but your own product fails to deliver on that promise. So the users, now educated, go to the second mover who actually polished the experience.
Apple has made a trillion-dollar career out of being the perfect second mover.
They certainly have. They let everyone else fail at MP3 players and smartphones before they came in and perfected it. Maybe Google is playing the Apple role here.
It's possible. Or, like you said, maybe Microsoft fixes these interoperability issues in the next 6 months, and we all just forget this conversation ever happened.
But the data right now, that decreasing preference, the low enterprise adoption, it suggests the current trajectory is negative.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought on that default behavior. We've spent 20 years just assuming that if Microsoft puts a button on our screen, eventually we're going to click it. We use Outlook because it's there. We use Teams because it's there.
It's the path of least resistance.
Exactly. But this report seemed to suggest that for AI, that fundamental rule is breaking. The convenience of having Copilot built right into the suite isn't enough to overcome the friction of it being just mediocre.
It turns out when you are asking a computer to think for you, you don't want the closest brain available.
You want the best brain available.
That's the takeaway. In the age of AI, good enough is dead. If the tool isn't magic, users will walk, even if they have to walk away from the software suite they've used their entire careers.
A sobering thought for everyone in Redmond.
Indeed.
We'll be watching to see if they can turn this ship around. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.